Kageno is an ugly, disputing loser who pretends to be weaker than your pull-out game. However, he's actually an overpowered Dark Lord with a harem of powerful assassins who help him clap every night. But before this, Kageno was still living his first life as a worthless background character in the real world, where he dreamt of becoming some kick-ass vigilante by enrolling in the MMA and beating the crap out of local thugs every night. At school, a certified pick-me girl, Akane, would always try to befriend him, despite his obvious reluctance. She did this because Kageno was the only one at school who didn't practically worship her. And since she was a showbiz actress and a filthy rich spoiled bitch, this didn't sit well with her. In reality, however, her people-pleasing antics stemmed from a trauma she suffered as a child actress some years ago when she got kidnapped by gangsters and was assaulted. Now, with her PTSD, she tries to play everyone's dream girl so she can hide her own bitterness behind her smile. One night, after spending the entire day working on the upcoming school festival, Akane waited for her driver to pick her up, only for that to never happen. With no other option left, she walked back home, something the so-called princess hadn't done since the kidnapping incident. What she didn't know was that her poor driver was getting his ass whooped by some gangsters somewhere while another bunch of those jobless thugs were coming to get her. Soon enough, Akane was surrounded too, and while the thugs knocked her out with a drug-soaked handkerchief, she saw Kageno, who was out on his daily criminal hunting stroll. When she came to, Akane found herself in an abandoned building where the kidnappers revealed they'd let her go as soon as they received ransom money from her cash cow parents. However, things soon got out of hand when one of those thugs forced himself on Akane and bitch slapped her for resisting him, triggering all her past traumas. However, just as she began crying, Kageno made a heroic entrance and introduced himself as the stylish ruffian slayer. True to his lame-ass name, Kageno easily condemned the first ruffian to hell. However, the next guy proved to be a challenge. This Chica Chad turned out to be an ex-militant, which weirdly turned on Kageno as he had always wanted to fight one. As their fight began, the jock initially took the upper hand using a dagger, but Kageno eventually showed him why he was the protagonist, by using crowbars to restructure his ugly face. With both of them dead, Kageno freed Akane and vanished, only to wallow in his misery and lack of strength later. Meanwhile, Akane's rich parents covered up the incident. However, no one could ever find the masked vigilant, aka Kageno's real identity. The next day, when Akane greeted him, Kageno used her correct name, meaning that he now respected her as a person. However, since this wasn't a rom-com, their budding relationship died within numbered days as Kageno got into an accident and lost his life. In his final moments, he realized even his power had limits, and if a nuclear war were ever to break, his edgy ass would turn into smoked beef in a second. However, thanks to Truck-Kuman's intervention, Kageno was reincarnated in a fantasy world with unparalleled magic power and a harem of hot elf girls who simped after him for kicks. Now, as the mastermind behind an underworld crime-hunting organization, Kageno finally became the wannabe vigilante working in the shadows he had always wanted to be. However, he still decided to play the background character and hide his true identity and strength for kicks. In this parallel universe, Kageno was born to a hot mama and a loser dad in a family that trained dark knights for the kingdom. He even had an elder sister who was drastically stronger than him, but only for the show since the real MVP had always been him, hiding in the shadows and wreaking havoc upon weaklings who dared to cross his path. Kageno's new power provided him with a slimy body coat that he could shape-shift into weapons and practically anything that he wanted, and he used it to show ugly losers their rightful place in hell. He mostly did it for the money because in this economy who wouldn't? Anyway, during one of his usual night hunts, Kageno came across a weirdly disgusting blob of meat and decided to use it as his punching bag for as long as it would last. However, while he was doing so, this blob of meat turned into a hot-as-hell elf one day, and he immediately changed his course of action. As this chick came back to her senses, Kageno flashed an edgy pose and pretended to be some overlord who had just saved her from a curse. He further fed her some made-up bullshit about a demon Lord Diablo, whose subjects turned her into a slimy monster, because she was one of the 3 descendants of the heroes that put the demon lord away. Knowing that his shit was being sold, Kageno took a step forward and updated his name from the wannabe ruffian slayer to Shadow, and invited her to join his cult to hunt Diablo. The dumb elf, whom he named Alpha, immediately believed him and swore her life to protect him. From then onward, Kageno's ad-libbing won him simps over simps, and he eventually turned them into his personalized fan club called the Shadow Garden. Meanwhile, he continued to live the life of a loser by deliberately losing to his elder sister Claire, who always pretended to be better than him. Later, as she turned 15, Claire was supposed to be sent to the Academy of Dark Knights. However, on the day of her departure, she went missing. Kageno's harem deduced it was the doing of Diablo's cult that must have misunderstood Claire for the descendant of a hero, while Kageno himself thought his brainwashing was making them take every local thug for a cult member. Either way, his Oscar-worthy acting skills help him play along, and his gang decides to locate and hunt the kidnappers at night. Meanwhile, Claire, who is being held captive, gets weirdly outraged when the kidnapper mentions going after Kageno, finally revealing her bro-con colors. However, the kidnapper simply sucker punches her into oblivion and reveals he wants to test her blood for a ritual, only for his grand scheme to get spoiled by Kageno and Ko's entrance. It turns out that Kageno's bullshit stories are actually true, and that these steroid-pumped jocks are members of Diablo's cult, trying to revive him. Alpha and the girls attack the kidnapper, but he flees the scene, only to face Kageno's plot armor-pumped ass later. He easily dodges the attacks of this 6-foot-something militant, and with a few slashes of his sword, makes a jigsaw puzzle out of him. The kidnapper gets even more high on his power-amping drugs, but even after going full Super Saiyan, he still loses to Kageno. Later, Claire returns home on her own and sets out to the Night Academy. With her gone, Kageno believes he can finally relax a little, only for all hell to break loose when Alpha and the girls reveal they have decided to part ways with him and pursue their individual lives. Kageno wonders where he went short on his ruse, but the girls promise to still be connected with him as long as they are after Diablo and his cult. A few years pass and Kageno travels to the capital to enroll at the night school as well. However, since he still needs to continue playing the role of a loser, he tries his hardest to stay away from the limelight. He stays at the shabbiest dorm, befriends the lamest weebs in existence, and makes weird bets to embarrass himself and uphold his background character image. One morning, his friends force him to keep his word and pay the penalty for losing a bet, which involves confessing his love to the school's head girl, Princess Alexia, who has never agreed to date anyone and has trampled on the ego of anyone who dared to confess to her. Kageno's masochistic ass confesses to her while stuttering and spitting. However, his grand scheme ends up in the gutter when she actually says yes to him and reroutes him to the path of a rom-com protagonist. His friends are just as surprised at where he got all this ruse from. The following day, Alexia even joins them for lunch, and thanks to her heavy pocket, the cheapskates get to taste meat for the first time in a while. Kageno, who wants her to dump him so he can revert to his old, insignificant life, gobbles it all up, only to find that she's rather enjoying the sight. Later, she drags him to her fencing lessons where Zenon, the head of the Royal Knights, is the instructor. He preaches to them some crap about fighting for the greater good, but Kageno is rather focused on Alexia's peculiar style of sword fighting. He notices that she sticks to the rules and has nothing all that great about her technique, something that he likes. Later, he overhears a conversation between her and Zenon and realizes they are engaged. Deducing that the bitch is merely two-timing him despite Zenon, Kageno tries to break up with her, only to realize the snakes he has for friends have already told her about their bet and his fake confession. Alexia threatens him into staying her side chick, but none of her warnings work as well as her shimmering gold coins do, in front of which Kageno wiggles his tail like her faithful dog. From then on, even though everyone calls him a gold digger, Kageno sticks to Alexia's side to fight inflation, something that begins to piss off Zenon. Later, as she bitches about him on the train, Kageno quietly listens to her, but later asks why she doesn't want to marry him despite him being the perfect husband material. Alexia says he's far too perfect, which makes her suspicious of whether he's hiding his flaws or is just plain psychotic. A few days later, on their way back home, Alexia trash-talks Kageno's fencing style and calls it plain, but Kageno says he likes her style despite hers being just as plain and uninteresting. This triggers her for some reason, and after bitching about how she's always wanted to be as great as her prodigal sister, and that she hates his guts, Alexia gets off the train. However, karma catches up to her and she gets kidnapped on her way home. The next day, Zenon captures Kageno as the prime suspect in her kidnapping, something he doesn't resist against. Meanwhile, Alexia finds herself captivated in a prison cell somewhere, right next to a weird, ugly entity. Just as she assumes it was Kageno's doing, a mad scientist walks in, thirsting for her royal blood. Upon being questioned, he reveals he'll use it to resurrect the Demon King. On the other hand, Zenon's cocky henchmen assault Kageno very harshly, but his sadistic ass is rather pleased about it. In fact, since both these small fries seem exceptionally stupid, Kageno mentally competes with them in a battle of who can act more stupid. Back at the Nutjob's lab, he fails to drain enough blood from Alexia and takes it out on the ugly entity, only for Alexia to bring his attention back to her to keep her safe. This doesn't age well, since he then makes her eat literal vomit, which drains her wanted humanitarian self quickly. Back at the academy, Zenon meets with Alexia's elder sister, Iris, who is the princess of the state, and they devise strategies to locate and rescue her sister. The Broken, on the other hand, has a mental breakdown upon learning about Kageno's capture, and tries hard to leave the dormitory to rescue him. A few evenings later, after Kageno is sent home freely, he notices a few sus men tailing him, only for Alpha to quietly take care of them. She later greets Kageno in his bedroom and reveals that she came back as soon as she learned that he was in trouble. Kageno, who never expected to see her again, is surprised to learn she's still working on extending his shadow garden, and is taken aback even more when she deduces Alexia was captured by the demonic cult too. Alpha's simping doesn't stop here, and she quietly lays him down, begins to strip him, and asks about his romance with Alexia, something she's clearly salty about. However, she quietly leaves when he promises it was only for show, and informs him Beta will be coming to meet him soon. To greet Beta, he brings out all the vintage paintings and aged wine he has procured from his side hustle as a thief and faithful dog. And it works wonders when she walks into his dorm and hears him talking in his deep Batman voice. The simp is instantly hot and bothered to witness Kageno in all his glory, and reveals that she and the rest of his girlies plan to revolt against the call tonight. Later, as he kickstarts this self-imposed mission, two more of Zenon's men try to frame him by planting Alexia's scent all over him, only for Kageno to mop the floor with their blood, something Beta takes notes of. As Kageno's cult begins its mission, so does Iris's team. They both try to locate Alexia's position. On the other hand, the mad scientist returns to Alexia's cell and injects the entity with her blood, hoping to awaken the demon lord. However, this Frankenstein experiment fails and the entity turns into a bloodthirsty monster instead, who first and foremost turns him into minced meat. Surprisingly, she doesn't hurt Alexia and instead breaks her chains, before heading out to the city to play Japanese Godzilla. Later, as Alexia steps out of the prison cell, she's disgusted to find Zenon's filthy face and realizes he's the one who kidnapped and tortured her. On the other hand, since he knows how to push her buttons, he compares her inferior blood to Iris, which blows her fuse. However, since this isn't Naruto, her emo-amped power-up doesn't work. Alexia loses her fight against Zenon. Knowing she's done for, Alexia prays for a miracle, and the miracle arrives in the shape of Kageno. After delivering a speech full of bullshit, Kageno makes his appearance, and Zenon immediately recognizes him as the masked vigilant who hunts at night. Thinking he's something, Zenon arrogantly belittles Kageno and charges at him. However, Kageno makes him eat his words. Just as his dumb face stares back at him, the Japanese Godzilla breaks free and wreaks havoc in the city. The measly knights under Iris's command try to hold her back, only to be spat away like mere flies. Iris plays the hero and slashes through the monster, only to realize it can heal itself even after losing an entire limb. This joke of a princess then tries to dice it up to keep it from regenerating itself. However, even that fails and forces Alpha to intervene. This elven queen immediately realizes that the monster wants to be exorcised and uses one swift move to completely obliterate it, setting it free. With the monster gone and Alpha victorious, Iris becomes a certified elf simp and asks her her name, but Alpha tells her to sit back and enjoy the show. On the other hand, the wannabe king of swag gets high on some steroids to fight Kageno, but even so, Kageno easily defeats him. He then triggers him on purpose by mocking his big mouth, which forces him to take even more pills. The resulting exchange of blows between their swords makes Alexia realize that despite being extremely powerful, Kageno's technique is very plain and simple, similar to her technique. On the other hand, after suffering yet another defeat at Kageno's hands, Zenon puts on his final Halloween costume and calls himself the Chosen One, only for Kageno to use his ultimate atomic-level attack and annihilate him. As the sparks from his attack shine all over the city, all his fangirls feel butterflies from afar, while Alexia swings her sword around once Zenon is obliterated and Kageno leaves. Soon, her useless sister arrives and embraces her, glad to find her alive, and the two put their family issues to bed. The next day, Alexia meets up with Kageno at school and thanks him for praising her fencing style, and with blushing cheeks, asks if they can continue to date for a little longer. Our Giga Chad curtly rejects her, making her unleash her sword at him in retaliation. Meanwhile, Kageno's harem, which still hasn't recovered from his dashing power moves, discusses the pressing issue of an impersonator claiming to be Shadow Garden and decides to obliterate it. On the other hand, Iris, who suspects Zenon's involvement in Alexia's abduction, creates his separate order of knights, independent of those working under him. In addition, she uncovers a relic that she claims would lead her to Diablo's cult, to decipher which an airhead Pinkett joins their school. On her first day, however, she crashes against Kageno, who has just survived Alexia's wrath, and falls in love at first sight. Over the next few days, masked vigilantes unalive people all over town in the name of Shadow Garden, while Kageno swears to his cultured friends that he's still a virgin after this breakup becomes official. The lame guys eventually force him to come along with them to visit a local superstore, which is the city's newest sensation. Meanwhile, Sherry the new Pinkett agrees to help Iris uncover how to use the relic she found after raiding a facility belonging to Diablo's cult. Back in the city, Kageno and co. arrive at their destination only to find a long-ass queue. While they wait for their turn, Kageno takes a look around and finds that this new store is eerily similar to the stuff he remembers from his past life. Suddenly, a hottie shows up and takes Kageno away for a survey, making the other two wonder when his lame ass became such a chick magnet. On the other hand, this girl brings Kageno to a lavish dream house where he finds one of his subordinates, Gamma. She reveals that she used all the knowledge he bestowed upon her to create this superstore that is making her millions, making him wonder how some measly bullshit he sprouted to appear cool turned into this piece of heaven. However, since Gamma is a genius, it doesn't take him by too much surprise. Later, she asks Kageno to take the throne she has prepared for him, but trips on her way and gets a nosebleed. As he settles on that pedestal soon afterward, Kageno's inner child squeals at how much of a king he feels like, but he acts like a tough jock and rewards all his subjects with a sparkling shower since his broke ass can't afford anything else. Gamma, who like every girl is satisfied with his bare minimum, calls it the best day of her life and shows him the billion gold coins she has garnered in revenue. Kageno breaks into a cold sweat since he has never seen so much money in his life, but he acts tough and asks Gamma about the recent copycat incidents. Gamma presents him with a theory that makes him wonder if the one behind it is Alexia, given her history of violence. When Kageno takes his leave, Gamma introduces him to Nu, one of the newest additions in her chick club, and assigns her to assist him. Before leaving, Kageno asks Gamma to give him 3 packs of chocolates and even steals a few coins to cure his poverty. At night, while he and his pals return to the dorm, Kageno senses a presence nearby and uses nature's call as an excuse to go after it. However, what he discovers proves he's just another dumb idiot who pretends to be cool. Instead of Alexia playing Shadow Garden, he finds that she's being hunted by the unknown imposter who claims to be them. Instead of helping her right away, Kageno, being the gentleman that he is, sits back and enjoys while the damsel deals with multiple vigilantes at once. However, when things get out of hand, he intervenes and condemns them to hell. This doesn't sit right with Alexia's communist ass, and she asks him why he doesn't use his power for the greater good. Kageno tells her to shut up before he leaves and she collapses. He then goes after the other wannabe thugs and hands them over to Nu for interrogation. When news about their death reaches the enemy's headquarters, their leader, who is a goblin slayer fanatic, tells his minions to prioritize retrieving the stolen relic instead of holding their funerals. Later, as Alexia tells Iris about the fake Shadow Garden, Iris tells her she cares about neither the cult nor the underworld, but wants to protect her own kingdom. The following day, Kageno and the 2 idiots play Confessing to Hot Chicks Round 2, and although both the losers get beaten by the girls' boyfriends, Kageno's Reese captures Sherry's heart, whom he gives his chocolates to just to get through with it. As her Delulu ass later fantasizes about a future with Kageno, while eating the sweets, her adoptive father calls it love at first sight, and believes Kageno must be crazy about Sherry to bring her something so expensive. The following day, Nu joins the school as an undercover student and informs Kageno that the lunatic they captured hasn't spoken up about the copycat Shadow Garden yet. She further explains how most of the cult followers have been drugged and brainwashed, except Rex, who is their only named soldier. Kageno, who is done with all this bullshit, believes there's a bigger reason why these imposters are posing as his organization and tells Nu to investigate. Later, his idiot friends reveal to Kageno that they have entered him in the upcoming Bushin Festival, so he can get popular with the ladies and help bed one of them too. During the festival, Claire smokes some weaklings to release her pent-up frustration, while the certified side characters try to make a fortune from gambling, however to no avail. As their bank accounts pile up a negative balance, Kageno faces Rose, a warrior princess in his first match, and realizes he has to get his ass whooped if he wants to win the Best Side Character award. They charge at each other as the match begins, and although Kageno has multiple possibilities to strike at Rose, he chooses to swallow some fake blood and get smoked. As he plummets on the ground, the referee announces Rose as the winner, only for Kageno to stand back up and claim he can fight some more. Rose defeats him once again, but he keeps standing back up like some emo-amp side character with a sad backstory and earns Rose's respect. She eventually uses her secret power move to finally defeat him, but ends up joining his simp club. As he is taken to the infirmary and bandaged like a mummy, a starry-eyed Sherry shows up before him and takes him out on a date. She offers him some handmade cookies, while Kageno wonders how he ended up on this rom-com path again. Sherry, who believes he wants to marry her, tells Kageno she'd rather start as friends before sleeping together. Just as he agrees to that, she brings out her adoptive father, who is the head of the kingdom's research department. At this point, Kageno realizes he has messed up by affiliating with potential main characters and decides to take a few days off. That evening, Sherry can't help but fantasize about Kageno again and later visits Alexia to inquire about her relationship with him, simply because she's jealous. After learning that they have broken up, Sherry delightfully announces she can freely date him now, much to Alexia's displeasure. Since she still likes Kageno, Alexia gets a seizure from imagining those two together, but pretends to be a tough, cold-hearted bitch. A few days later, as Kageno rejoins school, Rose shows up to their class and talks about some upcoming election. Meanwhile, the Goblin Slayer copycat uses an antique relic to cast a barrier around the school. Kageno realizes something is off, but when he tries to use his magic, he finds that it doesn't work. Right then, the cult-suited vigilantes break into their classroom and tell everyone to get on their knees, only for Rose to refuse. She pulls out her sword and tries to act like a hero, however, she has no idea her magic won't work on the opponent. So right before she gets screwed, Kageno butts in and shields her, only to be discarded as his side piece himself. On the bright side, Rose's delusions upgrade and she starts believing he is smitten with her enough to lay his life in her service. Although everyone believes he's done for, Kageno is just thrilled to finally have terrorist attack stories to flex before his grandchildren. Later, as the cult's leader locks up all the students in the auditorium, while his lackeys search for the relic in Sherry's possession, Kageno comes back to life and finds a way to use his magic by releasing it in small proportions. Meanwhile, just as Sherry finally finds out how to decode the relic, the nutjob, Rex breaks into her room through the window and tells her he's here to steal the relic for his boss in exchange for being allowed to wreak as much havoc as he can. He swings his sword at her, and just as he thinks she's game over, her guard dog shows up and claims he can whoop his weak ass. As Sherry escapes and leaves everything to him, Kageno observes the chaos from the rooftop, typical for a powerful Dark Lord, pissed at the fact that these copycats attacked in broad daylight despite calling themselves shadows. He further notices all their methods are exactly by the book, and they've clustered all the hostages in an auditorium, where he assumes their leader must be. However, since striking before dawn isn't his style, Kageno sticks to attacking them from the shadows and wipes out unit after unit. Suddenly, he finds the pink idiot running around the hallways completely exposed and secretly saves her dumbass by wiping out everyone who targets her. When it's time to finally make his appearance, he shows up as her knight in shining armor and catches her as she trips. Surprised to see the blood stain on his clothes, she asks if he needs to be rushed to a hospital, but he acts tough and instead lectures her about her carelessness. They later head to safety in a library, where Kageno realizes Sherry is the MC of this arc, but wonders where her sidekick is. Later, her big brains tell him about the relic the enemy is using to block their magic, and show that the one in her possession can be used to block its effects. She also explains how the relic only absorbs the magic it has been exposed to before, and Kageno realizes he can use small-frequency magic because it's practically undetectable. Upon learning that the relic can only function in places where magic energy is concentrated, Kageno realizes that the relic is currently in the auditorium, and the two form a tag team to first decode the relic and second, and then stop the Goblin Slayer's grand scheme. As Kageno goes back to her study to retrieve the instruments for the first part of their plan, the cult's leader trash talks Rex about how much of a shithead he is for not being able to overpower a single weak, good-for-nothing bitch. Rex tells him he needs to watch his own ass since half of his army has already been wiped out before he heads back to find Sherry. However, as soon as he gets back inside the building, his minions disappear and Kageno greets him with a punch to his sorry face, since he can't see Kageno thanks to his speed. This wimp casts a magic net around himself to keep him at bay, only to find Kageno right in the heart of his defenses. As this self-proclaimed supervillain turns into Kageno's soccer ball, he ends up in a church full of the corpses of his comrades and begins to lose his sanity. Right then, Kageno appears from behind him and adds him to his corpse party. Meanwhile, New gathers info at Sherry's office. She finds one of her guards there who happens to be her ex-fans. Pissed off at their breakup, she pulls out a blade to finish him off, only to be interrupted by Kageno, who is there to gather instruments to tune the relic. New informs him that his girlies have already infiltrated the school and will be ready to attack as soon as he signals them, and Kageno tells her to do nothing until the relic is prepped up. Later, while Sherry finally makes herself useful, the students locked up in the auditorium begin to grow restless. The knights under Iris's command hesitate to break in because they suspect there might be more rats within the building, while New signals Gam to stay put. Rose, on the other hand, worries they would still pretty much flunk it before the evil cult lord, even if they did break in. On the other hand, Sherry manages to activate the relic and takes Kageno to the auditorium via a secret passage her father told her about. His cinephile ass loves the thrill of playing James Bond, but Sherry is reminded of how brutally her mother was unalived in there by none other than her shithead adoptive father, whom she blindly ignored in hopes of at least keeping a daddy. After Sherry heads to the auditorium via this pathway, some lunatics at the hostage site shoot their guns at the poor students, a sight that amuses their sadistic psycho leader. However, the wimp Rose refuses to take action because she's too busy pissing her pants. Sherry watches all this bloodshed and, in a fit of rage, throws the relic up in the air. It instantly reacts to the one in the cult leader's hand and wipes out the barrier. With their magic back in action, Rose wipes out a bandit and inspires the others to fight back. As chaos ensues, both teams come at each other's throats and Rose struggles against the number of attackers targeting her. However, just as she thinks she's cooked, Kageno makes yet another cool entrance and praises Rose's swordsmanship. This blind bitch also doesn't recognize he's the loser Kageno plays at school. Meanwhile, Kageno and co. overwhelm the cult with their power, so much so that the wimpy leader tries to flee. Kageno notices this, but before he reacts, the shithead sets the entire school on fire. After Rose barely evacuates the students, Iris finally shows up but still proves to be just as useless. On the other hand, Sherry tries to look for her father, but to no avail. Meanwhile, the cult leader heads to Sherry's study and sets her books on fire. It turns out that the Goblin Slayer wannabe was Sherry's shithead father all along, something that Kageno already guessed. When asked about why he's doing this, like every villain ever, he recites his sob story. It turns out that he was once at the top of the sword fighting game, but an injury knocked him off the charts. Now he's salty about this and is basically throwing a tantrum. This shameless guy even goes on to boast how he got rid of Sherry's mother simply because her dumbass was getting in his way, and later invites Kageno to a battle of fists when he makes it clear he doesn't give two shits about him or his past. One move from the edgy old man sends Kageno to the afterlife, only for him to be resurrected as the evil Dark Lord he truly is. Witnessing his unparalleled rise, the man realizes he'd be done for unless he uses steroids. Once high, he turns into Voldemort with hair, but Kageno simply stands and dodges all his attacks, and eventually cuts him all up. As he meets the same end as Sherry's mother, the dumb pinkette walks in and loses her mind, mourning the douchebag that orphaned her in the first place. Meanwhile, Kageno walks away without telling her the truth. The following day, Kageno becomes an international villain on the news front page, something that doesn't sit right with Alpha and his other bitches. Meanwhile, Sherry approaches him as their racist school finally closes for good and reveals that she's leaving for another city to focus on her research. When Kageno asks why so, she says it's a secret, and the two bid farewell to each other. Over the next few days, Kageno enjoys his life of solitude after evading his pestering sister, and receives a letter from Alpha, inviting him to a holy land somewhere. Meanwhile, his gang of simps extends to the literal half-bitch Delta and Epsilon, who doesn't believe flat is justice. In fact, with the slimy power Kageno granted her, she turns her plums into watermelons to give Beta's courage a competition. This natural beauty, on the other hand, spends her time writing and fan fiction with Kageno as the male lead of her dreams. However, when she hits writer's block, Beta is left with no choice but to head outside and face Epsilon in a battle of assets. Unfortunately, since being slimy isn't Epsilon's #1 quality, she uses her nasty bitchy personality to argue that Kageno has been thirsting after her more often than her, simply thanks to her juicer melons. Although Beta doesn't agree, their argument is cut short when Nu shows up and informs them of news from Alpha. Meanwhile, Gamma meets with Iris and Alexia at her department store and helps them shop for Alexia's upcoming guest appearance at a competition in the Holy Land. She also lets them suck on some premium chocolate balls out of courtesy, and later helps Alexia pick out some hot undergarments from her panty heaven. However, Iris believes Alexia shouldn't be exposing so much of her skin, making Alexia convince her otherwise by showing off her perfectly plump peaches and rizzing her up against the wall. On the other hand, the newest addition to Kageno's fan club, Rose accompanies him to the Holy Land while fantasizing about saving him from an arsonist's attack and giving him her whole heart. However, Kageno isn't all that excited about some bitch-sucking faces with him and eventually pushes her away for his much-needed personal space. Walker de Luluas continues to go on and on about their upcoming grand wedding ceremony and 3 future kids. Kageno researches the local religion, the divine teachings and its beliefs about the 3 legendary heroes who descended to the Holy Land years ago. When they reach the Holy Land, Rose takes Kageno to a local market, where he finds a keychain symbolizing how the greatest of the 3 heroes, Olivier, cut off Diablo's left arm. She also informs him that this legendary hand has been sealed in the ruins of some place called the Sanctuary nearby, and later takes him on a book haul. To Kageno's surprise, her favorite rom-com author turns out to be Beta, who is currently selling a pirated version of the Cinderella story for millions. He still gets her autograph but questions his shitty brain for not using his own wisdom to make money, unlike Gamma and Beta. Later, as he compares her autograph with Rose's, they realize Beta has written his in an ancient language that Kageno somehow covers up. Meanwhile, an edgier version of Alpha infiltrates the local church, only to find that the Archbishop has been eliminated, along with his minions. This makes her question what he was hiding, but she leaves right before she gets captured. At night, Kageno watches over the city like some supervillain while he innocently eats some ice cream, and later turns completely sadistic as he uses the ice cream stick to slice an imposter in 3. Right then, Epsilon shows up and tries to get his attention by showing off her bouncy melons. However, the tough guy is more interested in getting information on their ongoing mission than some slime implants. After hearing her report, Kageno says he'll carry out his side of the mission however he wants and leaves. The next evening, he heads to the local hot springs to enjoy some peace away from his annoying fangirls, only to find the pioneer of his harem soaking wet at the same inn. Although Kageno completely ignores her existence, Alexia can't believe her luck for crossing paths with him butt naked after buying all those expensive panties. However, being a cultured woman, she also can't help but ogle at his physique and says she's glad he's alive after getting injured so badly. While attempting to continue their small talk, Alexia reveals she's in the Holy Land to attend the upcoming goddess's trial and learns Kageno is only here as an accidental tourist, without actually knowing about how the event goes. She explains that the chosen warriors basically summon strong emperors from the past and fight them, something that Kageno isn't all that interested in. Realizing this, Alexia mentions she's disappointed in how her juicy assets aren't winning any of his attention, and Kageno explains he likes to keep his eyes to himself at hot springs. Instead, he asks her to stop ogling his Excalibur. Alexia mocks him for being delusional and calling some measly worm an Excalibur. However, she's instantly proven wrong when he stands up and flashes his sausage at her. After he leaves, the poor girl is left distraught and questions her entire existence. The next day, as the trial begins, the new Archbishop kickstarts the ceremony with a long, boring speech, while Alexia internally curses the Baldy for ignoring the previous bishop's death, almost as if it never happened. She further recalls how he canceled their inspection and humiliated her just hours ago, which further infuriates her. However, her attention immediately gets stolen by Beta, or rather her huge size, when she's introduced as the guest of honor, following the success of her novels. Expectedly, the crowd roars when she bends down and flashes her assets, while Alexia's insecure ass feels mad about not receiving the same treatment. Beta's smug jealousy toward Alexia for being Kageno's ex doesn't help either, and the bad blood between the ladies becomes obvious very early on. Their bickering fades into the background when Rose is introduced, right after which the trial begins. The puny first contender, who looks like he hasn't worked a day in his life, calls out to the ancient warriors only for no one to answer his calls. As he drags his weak ass back to the chambers, an arrogant, sturdy knight takes his spot, only to meet the same fate. Meanwhile, Kageno watches this from the stage and imagines himself making a flashy entrance in the middle of the game like every edgy weeb ever. He also struggles with wanting to take the field to clap everyone's asses, and needing to sit back and play the best extra he possibly can. However, his fantasy turns to dust when the announcer suddenly calls out his name as one of the participants. Meanwhile, his ladies infiltrate the entire city to get info and to stay stationed at their specific locations. Back at the Colosseum, everyone trash talks Kageno and expects him to be yet another wimp who'd only get smoked by the ghosts, making him struggle between wanting to run away and embarrass himself later and staying and exposing his identity. Eventually, he decides to distract the audience with a flash of light and makes his appearance as his shady alter ego, completely sure it'll boost the show's views. After sprouting his typical introductory bullshit, Kageno summons an ancient ghost to fight him, while the ugly Baldy believes he's too cocky for his own good. However, he eats his words just as the door to heaven opens right on top of the stadium and Hot Baddie appears before Kageno as his opponent. This intimidating lady happens to be the Witch of Calamity, Aurora, who long ago wreaked havoc throughout heaven and earth. Beta, who watches this from the mezzanine, pulls out a notebook from her safe spot and asks the cultured, disgusting Baldy to fill her in with more information, while the other two girls roll their eyes at her shamelessness. However, thanks to this very shamelessness, the Baldy explains how dangerous the witch is and how slim the chances of Kageno's survival are, only for Alexia to contradict him. Being a certified simp, she believes that this trial only summons those who are equal in strength to the opponent, which is why Kageno should be able to hold his ground against Aurora. On the other hand, Kageno feels sparks flying between the two of them as the butterflies in his stomach tell them Aurora feels the same way about sword fighting that he does. Believing that combat is just another way of holding a conversation, Aurora fires her first shot, which Kageno easily evades. Although the ugly Baldy believes Kageno is losing, his fangirls believe he's doing just fine, considering how easily he's evading the attacks. Meanwhile, Kageno continues to simp after the baddie, and eventually breaks her strongest blood web to smithereens, ending the battle right after he slashes through her. Aurora, on the other hand, feels happy about dying because she understands Kageno's love language, but mainly because she's sadistic. As Kageno flees after his mic drop moment, the barrier around the Colosseum suddenly breaks and a weird magic gate splits open, thanks to Alpha and Koa's efforts. Elsewhere, Kageno praises himself for putting on such a great show when suddenly, a similar magic gate opens up in front of him. However, since he doesn't want any more drama for today, he chooses to ignore it, only for the gate to follow him around until he gives in and steps into it. Back in the Colosseum, everyone worries about why this is happening when the bald Pope explains that the sanctuary may have responded to Kageno's immense power. He further says that the gate only opens when somebody seeks it, and that it doesn't need to be manifested physically. He then orders everyone to evacuate the building just as the door begins to open. However, before the ladies can leave, Kageno's gang shows up and asks everyone to behave. Epsilon takes out all of the Baldy's guards as Alpha and Delta step into the gate too. Epsilon, who's the only one left behind, captures the Baldy in hopes of dragging him along and threatens to slice Beta's neck with her sword if either of the princesses tries anything fishy. However, since she has a kink for swords, Beta only makes happy noises, while Alexia believes she couldn't care less whether she lives or not. Suddenly, a masked assassin shows up and slices through her fake melons, completely pushing her buttons. On top of it all, Beta's assets bounce right before her eyes, making her realize she can't get exposed just yet. With the power of slime, she reclaims her womanhood before completely annihilating the assassin. The psycho then makes sure nobody saw her flat board and drags the Baldy through the door, right after which Beta is pulled into it. Alexia and Rose, the only two left behind, also refuse to become side characters and jump into the gate right before it disappears for good. On the other side, the two crash on top of Beta, and Alexia uses this chance to make sure her meaty assets aren't as fake as Epsilon's. Right then, the ruthless Alpha arrives and allows everyone to do whatever they want to. As they move deeper into the sanctuary, Alpha reveals to everyone that the history of Diablos that they know of is as fake as world politics. In fact, the hero Olivia, whose statue they find inside the sanctuary, was a woman who happened to have the exact same face as Alpha. In a fit of rage, the Pope calls her a failed experiment, confirming Epsilon's suspicions about the cult's dark history. Alexia, whose dumbass couldn't pass third-grade math, follows Alpha through the next door to find the truth, only for the elf to disappear together with the image of Olivia. Meanwhile, Kageno finds his beloved eye candy as he walks in and asks whether it was her who summoned him. Aurora, who is tied to a chair, denies this and asks if he can help untie her. Kageno pulls out his sword and slashes through her straitjacket, leaving her fully exposed for fan service. After she puts on her magic clothes, she asks Kageno to team up with her so they can escape this memory prison. When Kageno asks how they'll do it, she says they only need to break its magic core, after which the entire sanctuary would cease to exist. However, the problem is that they cannot use magic, since they are close to the heart of this prison, but Kageno says he'll manage just fine without it. On the other hand, Alexia and the others watch Olivia's memories to learn how the cult gathered orphans as guinea pigs in the past to perform experiments on and turn them into creatures with both the heroes and Diablos of blood. Meanwhile, Kageno and Aurora's venture leads them to a greenhouse where they find young Aurora crying. Kageno asks the reason behind it, but the witch believes she probably just pissed her pants at that time. She then bitch slaps herself to break the memory, and they manage to move on to the next one. Back at the laboratory, Alfred explains how Olivia was just one of the many children they implanted the demon cells into, but the baldy reasons that they did it because they needed someone strong to counter Diablos' attack if he were ever to strike. Alfred doesn't buy his shit and explains how the mission they later assigned Olivia wasn't to take down the demon, but to extract more cells from him in order to further the church's experiments. As this memory breaks, they move on to a battlefield where a bunch of weaklings attack the demon at once and manage to steal his arm, something they used in the past to start their drug business. The next memory brings them to the heart of the sanctuary where the demon's arm is sealed, and Alfred explains how the cult later perfected the drugs to create an elixir for immortality. However, since they could only create one demon ball a month, and to gain immortality, needed to consume it at least once a year, only 12 people could have it. In another twist of fate, it turns out that the Pope is one of those 12 shitheads who are still alive thanks to the drugs. Alpha believes they still need to perfect the drug to fix the side effects such as hair fall, for which they need people with Olivia's blood, such as herself. Hearing this, the Baldy finally shows his true colors and breaks free from the restraints, only for Delta to impale him and throw him into the river below them. Epsilon lectures her about being dumb enough to eliminate him before getting information, but Alpha believes he is still alive. True to her suspicion, the worm jumps out with a blob of meat pushing him and separates the group in two, bringing Alpha, Beta, and Delta to a fighting ground where he flashes his Walmart-bought bodysuit. He immediately uses multi-shadow clone jutsu to increase his manpower, but Delta's crazy ass still claps him. However, she soon learns that her magic is vanishing, and the Baldy announces it's because they are at the center of the sanctuary, that their magic is being sealed while his magic is multiplying. Delta, on the other hand, isn't half impressed and charges at him with full force. Meanwhile, as Kageno spends time with Aurora, the two end up being tossed onto the battlefield with the witch landing right on top of his cake. After she helps him up, they find yet another version of baby Aurora crying in the middle of nowhere, and Aurora decides to shut her up for good this time. With Kageno's Excalibur, she tries to unalive her, only to be attacked by some ugly, disgusting zombies. Kageno steps in to save her just in time and later slaughters the Walking Dead army, earning Aurora's praises. He then attacks baby Aurora to break this memory as well. On the other hand, Epsilon ventures into the sanctuary and discovers a library where she and her pals research past experiments. Assuming they won't be able to retain the info or take the books back with them, the girls take pictures of the pages when suddenly their clothes start disappearing, probably for more fan service. Just as Epsilon assumes it's because they can't use their magic properly. Her blobs of slime also retire from her chest, and she makes sure the others never speak of it again, just as she reclaims them. Meanwhile, as Aurora and Kageno end up near the magic core, Delta strips herself and continues to overpower the Baldy, only for him to continue multiplying a number, thinking he can win. However, Delta's psycho ass still annihilates him and manages to break the memory. As the Baldy pisses his pants before Alpha and asks how 100 of his clones could so easily be defeated, she says that 0 multiplied by any number is still 0, which was the IQ of each of his clones. Meanwhile, Kageno and Aurora discover a magic sword that is supposed to break the chains to unlock the core. However, when Kageno attempts to pull out, it rejects him since he isn't the chosen one. With nothing else to do, they give up and decide to just chill. On the other hand, the fat scaredy cat summons Olivia to fight Alpha, but they leave before the fight even begins as their objective of gaining information has been achieved. Just then, the Pope receives info that the core has been infiltrated and comes after the intruders. Meanwhile, Kageno asks Aurora why she wants to disappear, something that'll happen once they break the core. She explains that repeatedly living the painful memories from her past is a little too much for her, and she'd rather break free from them. Kageno nods, calculating that the protagonist of the story must be making his appearance in a bit, only to be utterly disappointed when the Baldy shows up instead. He refuses to let either of the two escape and sends Olivia to finish them both. Aurora, who is aware of how strong she is, asks Kageno to leave, but he refuses, knowing full well that plot armor will save his ass either way. As the battle begins, Olivia's ultra-fast speed begins to pound him hard, something that only makes him grin from the excitement. The hero even manages to slash his arm, but Kageno still refuses to fight back because Olivia lacks a heart, and fighting without a heart-to-heart conversation just isn't his cup of tea. Just as he's about to get beaten again, Aurora steps in and asks him to leave, thanking Kageno for all that he has done for her, only for the Baldy to make fun of how a witch is trying to play the heroine. After hearing some more of their bullcrap, Kageno refuses to be treated like some damsel in distress, only to be fatally attacked by Olivia. However, since he planned to get attacked like this, Kageno uses the narrow distance between himself and Olivia to pull her close and leave a hickey on her neck to make her disappear. Seeing this absolute horror, the Pope asks how Kageno could survive being stabbed in the gut, and he explains he can shift his organs using magic to avoid getting critical hits. This tactic allows him to close the gap between his opponents and himself and counterattack in the best way possible. The Pope asks whether he's right in the head before launching his second counterattack with 100 copies of Olivia. However, even this time around, Kageno uses one swift move to finish them all, just as his magic returns. He explains he solidified his magic until it couldn't get absorbed into the surroundings anymore, and finally managed to manipulate it right now. Pissed off, the Baldy orders even more Olivia clones to attack him, only for him to mop the floor with them. Finally, he uses his atomic energy manipulation to launch his final attack, only to be stabbed in the heart by Olivia. However, this still doesn't faze him, and he manages to destroy the entire sanctuary, including the magic core. Meanwhile, his baddies watch this scene from afar. Sometime later, Kageno wakes up in a garden with his head lying on Aurora's lap and explains to her how he shifted his heart to the right side to survive the attack. Unaware of how medical sciences work, she calls him amusing, only to realize she has started to disappear. In her dying moments, she confesses it was she who summoned him because she wanted to disappear and forget everything. However, now that she has met him, she doesn't want to forget the time she spent with him. Kageno also thanks her for giving him a good time as she caresses his lips and kisses him, before turning into stardust. Meanwhile, as Alexia and the girls wander through the forest, Alexia whines about how weak and worthless she felt throughout this arc, and Rose agrees with her, complaining about how they still know nothing about either the cult or Kageno's syndicate. Beta asks what she plans to do about it, only for Alexia to suggest that the three of them form their own girl squad and gather information they might later be able to use. Beta believes Alexia is too stupid to play any form of Sherlock Holmes, but still joins her. Meanwhile, Alpha learns that the core, the sword, and the sanctuary were all wiped out by Kageno and Simps after how badass he is. She further approves of Beta infiltrating Alexia's one-ape girl group and later breaks the unfathomable news of Aurora's true identity. It turns out that Kageno had just made out with the demon Diabolus itself, but Alpha decides to keep it from him, assuming that he already knows. Sometime later, Gamma buys an expensive property loaded with petroleum for a cheap price in hopes of extending her business, while Delta goes off on her own playing a werewolf. Meanwhile, Alexia informs Iris about how the Church of Divine Teachings has been involved with the Demon's Cult and asks that she eliminate them entirely, but Iris refuses, reasoning that she doesn't have enough influence just yet to convince their father, the king. To gain this influence, however, she wants to participate in an upcoming festival, something that Alexia is worried about, given both the cult and Shadow Garden's antics. Iris's Delulu, on the other hand, says her sword will be undefeated against both these organizations. She also believes that the attacks launched by both Shadow and Alpha were thanks to artifacts and not the real strength. At the same time, as Rose practices her swordsmanship, her heart suddenly hurts and she finds a weird pattern marking her chest. A few days later, as the legendary Bushin Festival begins, Kageno observes all the losers participating in it from a skyscraper and calculates who would win and who wouldn't. He also fantasizes about crossing out another move from his wishlist, aka playing a weak, good-for-nothing side character who is actually crazy strong. To make it come true, he visits Kamen and asks that she help him disguise himself to enter the festival. When she asks him why, he refuses to expose his weird fetishes and tells her not to question him. After this, she brings out all the cosplays in her arsenal and uses some 16th century cosmetic surgery to change the shape of his face. He chooses to play an insanely mediocre guy who seems like he hasn't smiled in a few hundred years, and hunches his back to show his lack of confidence. On the first day of the festival, a cocky bitch with a bad case of hair dye gone wrong, who happens to be the champion of the decade, stops him in his tracks and tells him to forfeit the match since he's a weakling who would never win. Kageno ignores her warning but feels butterflies in his stomach upon realizing that his disguise is working perfectly. However, this annoying bitch isn't alone and has a bunch of simps following after her, one of whom is a sturdy jock who is a complete headcase. Although one look at him tells Kageno he's the king of losers, this guy thinks he's something and tells Kageno to do as Anaros says he should. This allows Kageno to flash his most baddest line, yet as he claims he's at least stronger than the third-rate lackey, only to piss him off. In a fit of rage, he punches Kageno and sends him flying, but he stays unharmed and calls him a weakling. This triggers his insensitive ass ever more, and he pounds him into the ground, only to stop when Anaros tells him to. Thinking he has learned his lesson, she tells Kageno to forfeit now, only to be stunned to see him uninjured. This forces her to apologize to him for not holding back the jock earlier, but Kageno calls her a pretentious bitch who should mind her own business. Later, as he waits in a line just outside the festival grounds, he flashes weird poses out on the streets, wondering if he has claimed his spot as the dark horse just yet, and recalls the day before. While they had some lunch, his lame friend, Skell from school, told him the favorite to win this year was probably Princess Iris. On his way back home, he came across Rose, who told him she'd be returning home for a bit to finally get engaged to her potential fiancé, Ashat. She further discussed how Alexia and Beta do not get along together at all, and Kageno assumes it's because both of them are equally freaky and annoying. Before she left, Kageno offered her a burger he bought for takeout and asked her to relax her stiff shoulders. Touched, Rose requested that he believe in her and the fact that she'll serve the people of her kingdom well, and Kageno agreed. Back in the present, he watches the first round of the festival with his dumb pal, who is wasting all his money by placing bets on losers. Just then, Goldie, the unbeaten champion of the last decade, drags his freak show to Skell and shows off his glittery ass, claiming he can judge all the participants by the look on their faces. When it's Kageno's turn, he claims that he only has about 30 units of strength compared to the 1,300 he assigns to his buff opponent. However, he ends up clowning himself when the buff guy trips and falls on his own feet, and Kageno becomes the winner. In reality, it was Kageno who punched him in the face, only that he did it so fast that no one could see a thing. Anaros, on the other hand, saw a glimpse of what happened and realized her pea-sized brain couldn't fathom this anomaly anymore. The following morning, Skell shows up to Kageno's inn uninvited, with the groundbreaking news of Rose's disappearance. On the other hand, Alexia and Beta also learn of the news that Rose stabbed her fiancé before fleeing, and although Beta wants them to proceed with caution, given the status of her fiancé, Alexia's impatient ass wants to jump right in and rescue her before she's locked up for a crime. In fact, when Beta argues against her idiotic and reckless plans, she grabs her by the collar and threatens to annihilate her, almost as if she can. As soon as Alexia leaves after throwing her childish tantrum, Beta asks her subordinate to keep tabs on Rose's location. Meanwhile, Kageno reads news about Rose's departure and swoons over how cool it is to run away after stabbing somebody, especially Idor Ashat Fiance. When it's his turn to fight, he leaves the stadium but comes across a hooded bombshell who stops him and asks why he smells of elves. Kageno honestly says he does have elf friends, making her ask if any of them look like her. As she removes her hood, Kageno realizes she's the spitting image of Alpha, but lies that she doesn't resemble anyone he knows. To test if he's an evil lord in disguise or just a plain loser, the diva swings her sword at him, only for him to dodge it as typically as a bona fide wimp would. As this lame move puts her worries to bed, she helps him up and tells him, "I'll become super strong someday." Meanwhile, the jock from before and the spoiled, cocky bitch try to figure out the secret behind Kageno's hidden strength, but the jock says it's purely coincidental, while Anaros believes he knows what he's doing. As the match between Goldie and Kageno begins, Anaros reveals that this James Charles Wanade isn't actually unbeaten because he forfeits the matches with opponents he believes he can't beat, despite being fairly strong. On the other hand, Goldie charges at Kageno with his thick and long Excalibur, something he miraculously dodges while cracking his neck. This pisses off the freak, and he delivers an emotional speech about Kageno's lack of expressions, hoping it would provide him with some plot armor. However, even as he unleashes his secret powerful move in the very next moment, Kageno sneezes and knocks him out, winning this round too. On the other hand, Iris meets with Ashat and Rose's father about her disappearance and offers assistance. However, Ashat uses her stance against Alexia's kidnapping as leverage to state that they'd rather deal with the disappearance as a family matter without involving their neighboring kingdoms. While his audacity pisses her off, Iris notices that he isn't as injured or stabbed in the guts as the papers suggested, and that Rose's father isn't in his complete senses for some reason. Meanwhile, Anaros apologizes to Kageno for underestimating her, but claims she's still too strong for him to beat in the final round. Kageno, who has been practicing this since the time he watched Naruto, whispers to her that he's warning her for the last time before taking off the weights on his arms and dropping them like he's the biggest Rock Lee fanatic. This understandably stuns Anaros, but she still believes she'll win, something that Kageno doesn't give two shits about. On the other hand, Rose is being hunted by her own knights while she ventures through the underground sewerage of her city, trying to save herself. The following day, Skell shows up uninvited at Kageno's inn and pesters him to look for Rose, since her kingdom has announced hefty rewards for whoever finds her, with which they can finally keep capitalism from biting them in the back. Although Kageno doesn't want to move an inch, as soon as he catches sight of his sister walking toward his house, he instantly changes his mind and flees with Skell. On his way to find Rose, Kageno comes across a piano sonata he dearly loved in his previous life and suspects that somebody else besides him got resurrected. To find out who it is, he walks into the auditorium playing this piece, only to find that it's Epsilon plagiarizing Beethoven's creation and his ideas once again. Disappointed but not surprised, Kageno recalls being forced to take piano lessons as a kid, when all he wanted to do was run around in the neighborhood with plastic guns and play a street ruffian. This changed when he discovered a tune called Moonlight and began yearning to play this in the background of achieving world dominance one day. Back in the present, after giving Kageno an orgasm with this melody, Epsilon thanks him for showing up, in exchange for which he praises her outfit and how well it fits her curves. Leaving her flustered, he walks out of her room and decides to steal the piano put out on display at the Music Academy. Meanwhile, as Alexia and Beta try to look for Rose, she seeks refuge in the stinky sewers after being completely cooked from all the consecutive fights with the knights and running away. Additionally, as the wound on her chest begins to grow, she realizes she's about to be possessed. In her final moments, she recalls her last meeting with her fiance, during which she realized that her father was high on some green leaves and under the Ashat's control, which forced her to pull her sword at him. Although the blade barely cut him, her own men instantly turned against her, and she had no choice but to flee. Just as she drowns in her misery even further, a beautiful melody catches her attention, and she realizes it's Beethoven's Moonlight, her favorite sonata. Upon discovering who's playing it, she finds Kageno finally fulfilling his dream of playing his edgy alter ego with this dark music in the background. Like some dumb bitch, she begins to clap for him, only for Kageno to question why she's here. This inspires her to yap about her sob story and how she wanted to protect everyone but couldn't. After hearing this, Kageno grants her a piece of his magic and tells her to continue to fight, right before he vanishes in style. As the wound on her chest instantly heals, some masked vigilantes surround her, only for Rose to defeat them all in one swift move, now that she has Kageno's strength. Feeling this immense blow, Alexia and Beta locate her only for Rose to ask that they leave her alone. As Beta realizes this bitch has inherited Kageno's contagious edginess along with his strength too, Alexia reminds her of the promise they made to support each other. However, Rose is too cool to talk to her now, so they instead engage in a fight, only for her to kick Alexia's ass. After leaving her with Beta, Rose finally leaves the gutter to officially become a rogue vigilant. On the other hand, Kageno returns to his dorm only to find Claire waiting for him at the door, and she doesn't seem too happy about him making her wait. Soon enough, she drags him back home and sits on top of him, choking him for making her wait for so long, making him wonder what kind of kink this is. She further elaborates and whines about Kageno not accompanying her to the countryside during their summer break, and gives him a VIP ticket to the Bushin Festival, telling him to attend it if he wants to make up for his broken promise. As he barely survives his sister's antics, Alexia discovers that Beta has left the city too. The following day, the semifinals of the Bushin Festival begin, and Kageno heads to the VIP section, only to find Iris occupying the spot next to him. She doesn't instantly recognize him, but when he mentions Claire, she realizes he's the same kid they groundlessly tortured when that good-for-nothing Alexia was captured. Realizing her mistake, she apologizes to him for the misconduct of her nights, making Kageno bite his lips out of fear that this special treatment might ruin how hard he has worked to stay on the sidelines. She further wishes he would stay friends with her sister as he was, but Kageno explains he was merely sucking up to her for money. Right then, the others ask Iris who she is rooting for in this match, and she mentions Anna Rose. This makes Kageno curious about what they feel about his character, so he asks what they think about him, only to learn they think he's just a weak ass who acts cool because he's got some speed. This makes him realize he could have won the Academy Award if he tried to in his previous life, and he excuses himself to join his next match. On his way to the changing room, Kageno comes across the elf from before who he now knows is the queen of fencing, Beatrix. This startles him a little, but she merely asks him about Alpha again and exchanges her hamburger with the one he bought before. On the other hand, Ashat shows up to spoil the mood and asks her who she thinks will win the next round, Anna Rose or Kageno. Although Iris acknowledges Anna Rose's strength, she mentions the confidence she feels in Kageno's eyes and believes there's a slim chance he might give her a run for her money. True to her word, as the battle begins, Anna Rose's arrogance once again judges him from her high horse and believes she'll win just as long as she outdoes his speed. However, even with repeated attacks, she fails to break his defenses. When it's Kageno's turn to wipe the floor with her sorry ass, he appears on her blind spot and slices through her shoulder, breaking her armor and finishing her in one swift move. Ashat, on the other hand, pisses his pants after witnessing Kageno's immense power and wants to either recruit him to the demon's cult or wipe him out. After some time, the loser bitch approaches Kageno and apologizes for underestimating him, and admits she has been an arrogant prick. Kageno also acknowledges her strength and shakes hands with her before leaving quietly. Meanwhile, after winning her next match fair and square, Iris spots Beatrix and invites her to become her guest during the next match. The elven queen of hotness, on the other hand, offers her a hamburger in return. On the day of the finals, Kageno enjoys some princess treatment in the VIP section when Iris shows up to annoy him. She asks how he's drinking coffee so easily when she can't do so because it's bitter. To get this conversation over with, he suggests she add lots of milk and sugar to her coffee. After doing so, she does enjoy the drink but ends up violating half of the world's rules. Just as they enjoy their coffee in silence and Kageno feels like a celebrity, Beatrix shows up, but the guards refuse to allow her inside with her weapon. Iris immediately intervenes, and after she exposes her identity, everyone who was previously acting tough kneels before her and begins bootlicking to get on her good side. However, her undivided attention is on Kageno, the chick magnet, whom she believes will become stronger in the future, despite everyone else's doubts. Meanwhile, Ashat drugs Rose's father, the king, before bringing him to the ceremony to make sure he listens to all of his commands. This shithead's real goal, however, is to assassinate Iris's father, the king of their neighboring kingdom, to start a war between the two and allow the demon cult to flourish in the meantime and attack when both the kingdoms are at their weakest. However, given just how strong Kageno's measly new identity is, he's currently shitting his pants, wondering what he might do if a war were to break as he plans. As soon as he reaches the ceremony with the king, Beatrix smells the drug on the king and mentions how much he stinks, triggering Ashat's sensitive ass. However, just as he begins thrashing her, Iris intervenes and warns him about who he's messing with. Upon learning that he's up against a legendary warrior, the scaredy cat leaves with his tail between his legs. However, now he has one more problem to deal with if he wants to please the demon he's currently serving. Soon enough, the final match between Iris and Kageno begins, and upon shedding her first glance, she realizes just how strong he truly is. She also realizes that no one has seen the full extent of his power, yet and plans to finish him before that gets unveiled. With this plan in place, she pulls her sword and aims to finish him in one swift move. However, just as she moves, she envisions Kageno slashing her throat in two and becomes completely paralyzed. Confused and wondering whether there's a bug in the matrix, she tries again, only to imagine her leg flying off this time. Almost as if he's awakened his Sharingan, Kageno continues to show her visions of her death while Rose breaks into the VIP section, only to discover that all the cult members have been wiped out. It turns out that it was the work of Shadow Garden that implores her to move forward with her mission. Back in the match ground, as Iris continues to fall back without attacking, the audience begins to trash talk her, forcing her to charge forward. However, even this time, a vision stops her in her tracks and Kageno uses this opening to plummet her into the ground. As she gets whooped in front of the whole kingdom, her disappointed father leaves the arena while Ashat panics over just how strong Kageno is, but before he can do anything about that, the bigger problem, Aka Rose, shows up and apologizes to her father for all the wrong she has done yet. The old guy, who is supposed to be possessed, responds to his daughter's apology and forgives her, pissing Ashat off. Right then, Rose draws her sword and charges at him, but he uses a sick old man to shield himself, whom Rose stabs in the process. Remorseless, she decides to slice her neck in half later, revealing that it has been her plan all along to end the royal bloodline so Ashat can't abuse them to wage wars anymore. However, before she can do that, Kageno steps in and reveals his identity as Shadow, whom Rose finally recognizes as the bandit from her past who saved her life. After she confesses to being his biggest fangirl, Rose leaves the stadium and Kageno points his sword at her defiance, only for Beatrix to step in and take him head-on. As war breaks out, Iris's father decides to implement martial law and asks his men to follow the runaway Ashat. On the other hand, while Kageno and Beatrix clash their swords, the truth about his real identity pisses Iris off for the sake of drama, and she swears to finish him with her own strength. On the other hand, Beatrix struggles to keep up with Kageno's supersonic speed and bites the dust every time she tries to land a hit. Right then, Iris shows up with a cheat code up her sleeve in the shape of an artifact, only for Kageno to mock her for being weak and using underhanded means. This blows her fuse, and she fires off her first attack, which Kageno dodges as if it's child's play, all the while evading Beatrix's attacks. Meanwhile, Rose comes across Alpha, who offers her two choices. One, that she joins them, proves herself worthy, and saves her kingdom, and two, goes off on a solo ride that is bound for doom. The princess thinks hard for a moment, but eventually chooses the first one, officially becoming a part of the Shadow Garden. Meanwhile, the girls take Kageno to the streets, since that's where he belongs, but even after they launch attacks after attacks, Kageno survives them all. Eventually, he gets his hands on a pair of crowbars, his favorite weapon, and clashes with them on a moving train, easily holding the upper hand. While Beatrix stays calm and collected, Iris's psycho ass continues to hurt Kageno's ears, so he finally shuts her up with a kick to her ugly face. With her gone, Beatrix uses a powerful clash to slice through Kageno's crowbars, only for him to get his hands on his real weapon, the slime sword. With this, he feels invincible and tells Beatrix that her magic energy is lacking a lot in his comparison, which is why she won't win. Right then, the animalistic madwoman jumps at Kageno with yet another fireball, only for him to survive it almost as if he's heat-resistant. This pisses her off even more, and she makes a two-step plan with Beatrix to take him down, only to be kicked in the chin and walked all over. However, even after tasting the most disgusting form of defeat, Iris still pretends she has the higher hand and threatens him with the fact that all the forces in the kingdom have been deployed after him and that he has nowhere left to run. Her shameless audacity makes Kageno laugh out loud as he wonders why he should be the one running away and from what. considering even the princess is nothing but a measly weak rat. With this, he gives them a taste of his atomic power and spreads his magic throughout the city. Threatening its entire existence, however, he spares them in the end and vanishes. Suffering from such disrespect makes Iris lose her mind, and she whimpers on her knees while Beatrix watches her calmly. A few days later, the news about this incident gets printed in the papers and Cagano gets labeled as the demon of the century. Meanwhile, Ashak gets reprimanded by the higher-ups of the demon cult for letting Rose go, but he promises to capture her as soon as he catches sight of her. On the other hand, Rose gets welcomed to the training grounds of the Shadow Garden, where the first step to learning is how to do fan service the right way. After she's stripped of her name, status, and even her clothes, she is also forced to let go of all her memories, including that of Cagano, which doesn't do her too well emotionally. Meanwhile, Cagano plays his favorite sonata in secret, content that he has finally fulfilled all his goals. This is where Cagano's delusion ends. Comment RIP Cagano to confuse the fake fans, and if you like anime recaps like this, watch this video.